Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Sam MacDonald is a sculptural artist who features fish. His work is instantly recognisable. I'm sure many of you will know it. I learn about what fishing means to Sam along with the process of creating his artwork. Sam MacDonald, it is great to have you along on the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thanks very much for having me on it, Pete. That's great.
It's an absolute pleasure. As a huge fan of your artwork, it's lovely to learn a little bit about what goes into the process of your artwork, but also your passion for fishing as well. And I'd love to uncover how the two are intertwined. But first off, for our listeners, whereabouts are you based and how does that affect your fishing? What sort of fishing are you doing?
Well, just before lockdown, we actually moved. We moved from Perthshire back to the coast just outside Edinburgh in Aberlady. And then with lockdown, it was kind of tricky, but I'm gradually getting to know the River Tyne near Haddington, and I'll be getting to know much more about sea fishing and that's around here, and maybe go out in a boat or two. But yeah, it's just finding my way now because we did just move just before lockdown. Before that, I was in Perthshire in a little town called Muse, so fished on the Erne and different places there. Yeah. So, but really nice to be back to the coast.
Lovely. And is that where your heart lies then? Is it with sort of the coastal life and does that your fishing revolve around where you live, or is it a passion for fishing in the salt as opposed to river, or you just enjoy it all?
I do enjoy it all. It was funny when we were looking for places to stay because we're moving down near a family. Both me and my wife, when we came over the hill near Haddington and we saw the sea, we both sighed with relief. And I thought, oh, there's something about the sea that just relaxes you. So it's important for me, I think, to be beside the sea. Not necessarily, I'm not just saltwater fishing mad or anything like that, but I like being beside the sea. Yeah. But the rivers are hugely important to me, probably more so than the sea.
Fascinating. Well, we're going to learn some more about that. And you talked about lockdown, and I guess that's we'll as I said to you off mic, we do go down some rabbit holes. But it was just got me thinking about it. So lockdown for you, was that a good time to be creative?
Yes, it was. The only and slightly annoying thing was suddenly everyone was at home with me. And my son and his family moved down too. So when I've been used to being by myself and working and having lunch when I want it and what I want, suddenly there were all these people about. So actually, lockdown was actually more social with me than it was before. So that bit of it was a bit annoying. I did like it. There was a bit of trouble getting materials, but actually doing work was really good. And also a lot of work sold because people weren't going away for their holidays. They were spending money on their house and seeing places that they wanted. And they realized that they could come directly to the artist too. So all in all, I was really busy throughout lockdown. And being in the country, like I do realize that the hardship people had who were in the cities and who were really by themselves. We just moved here, so it was quite nice to explore the countryside around and swim, do a lot of wild swimming. So I got well into that. So that was quite good. I did get warned right in the middle of lockdown. Well, not quite when it was kind of easing up a wee bit, but you weren't meant to go more than, I think it was 2 miles. I was at one beach and I'd been warned that the police would be about at this beach. And sure enough, they were, because there was a lot of windsurfers who'd come all the way over from Glasgow to go surf. But I was just swimming. So I got out of my van and was just getting my stuff together. And sure enough, a police car came right up behind me. And I turned round to speak to him because we're only 1.5 miles from it. And the policeman had obviously done his business and drove away. And then he did a U-turn and he came flying back. And he opens his window and says, "Are you Sam MacDonald, Derek MacDonald's brother? Do you do the fish?" So he says, "Oh, I've got to come and get a fish from you." So that was quite nice. That was quite a nice bit of I said, yes, and I only live about a mile away. He says, oh, I know. So yeah, so that was quite good.
Nice. So you're even selling when you're swimming as well. So it never off duty is the saying. It's interesting, and we'll talk about your medium a little bit more, but you talked about material costs and stuff like that. And I know with our little magazine that there has been a sharp rise. And to put things in perspective, our previous rise before for the spring, I think it was about 8 or 9% paper costs went up. And then they've gone up another 15% for this issue that's just going to start appearing with readers soon. Have you experienced similar sort of things?
Yes, it's been huge because I deal in metals. A lot of the metals come from Germany and other places in Europe. So Brexit, the prices for metals it's gone up probably maybe 40% even. It's gone up hugely. So yeah, and it's tricky to get hold of. Suddenly there's a delay time, so you've got to pre-order things well in advance. So yeah, that side of things is very hard. And with carriage, I had one piece, two similar pieces, same size, about a meter by meter, both of them, both mackerel shoals. One of them was going to Singapore, and the other one was going to Dublin. The one that went to Singapore cost less to ship it to Singapore than the one that went to Dublin. So yeah, so prices are kind of crazy just now.
Yeah, my worry is that we get sort of conditioned to these and the price doesn't come back down again. That's my worry, and that we can wear it for the time being, but my fear is that it's not going to come back down. Do you sense that too?
Oh, definitely. Metals never come back down. There's never a drop in price of metals. And yet, when you sell the scrap, the tiny wee bits at the end to the scrappy, it's always, oh, metals are down in value. But I've never known them to go down. But yeah, the metals will definitely continue. Raw materials just continue going up.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on this thread, I think it will be a really good way to talk about your artwork. And how would you describe it? Because we're talking about art and we're talking about metal, it's obviously not what people would always. I'm sure many people listening to this and readers of the magazine as well will certainly know your work. But how would you describe your artwork to somebody listening who hasn't seen it before?
It's very old-fashioned metalwork techniques and put in a kind of contemporary composition. But the actual techniques I use are hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's sitting at an anvil tapping scales with the metal chisels that you've made for the different scales of the different fish. So it's quite laborious, and takes a great deal of patience. But you go into a bit of a dwam while you're doing it. It's quite nice to do. And with the radio on or audible books, and I have a wee TV in the workshop too. So there's always, noise or music or stories going on. A lot of stories. I like the audible books. So, and it's sitting tapping with various hammers to get the fish itself. I cut out of pewter. They're mostly pewter. I cut it out and then I draw the details onto it and then hammer in with the metal chisels. And I work on both sides of the fish on a bed of pitch to bring out the details. Then I dome it out on a leather sandbag with different bossing hammers, and then you start colouring. And that's the nice part when you start colouring, because that's when you add the gold leaf and there's an instant glimmer and shine to the fish, and the fish starts taking on a life of its own. I like doing it this way because the fish are imperfect. So they're a bit like fish themselves. They carry their own marks and scars, so have their own history. And I think that gives them more presence. I then set them, they're all usually flat, kind of relief for walls. So I'll set them in a frame. And the frame will be patinated with different chemicals on usually copper, where you're just speeding up the breakdown of the copper, but you're controlling it a bit. So they're set on a colored background. And yet the first fish I did were very much trophy fish. And I did one just for the house. And it was a straightforward mackerel and just straight on a board. But then I thought, well, that's not the fish that I see, and that's not what I like about fish. So then I started giving them movement, direction, chasing things, flies, etc., and even looking at their bone structure. So for a while in Orkney, when I would catch a fish, I'll draw it and print from it, where you de-slime it and print from the fish, and you get an amazing impression. It's called gayataku, which is a Japanese form of printing. So I'll print it, draw it, photograph it, fillet it and eat it. But then I'll bury the bones in the garden. I'll put them under a big stone or a big bit of metal. And then after a few months, I'd get the skeleton back so that I would be able to do more fossil-like pieces based on the skeletons that I was getting. So I did make use of the whole fish. We did laugh when we've left our houses in the past, that the people who have moved in will suddenly find like a halibut skeleton or a cod skeleton in the garden. So it'll confuse the archaeologists of the future.
That's fantastic. And that Japanese style of printing is fascinating. I've got one that John Girac did as well, hanging on the wall here with a stonefly in there. Absolutely beautiful. And it was interesting you talking about, when you said that the style that you use is many, many years old. Yet the first word that comes into my mind when I think about your work is contemporary. But it's really fascinating to get an insight into how deeply that you delve into the fish that you are going to replicate as well. So, these are all the things that we see the picture, don't we, on social media, in a magazine, wherever it may be, and we don't know how much has gone into actually getting that fish to its finished stage. So how long does it take you from start to finish to get one of these pieces done?
That's a really good question, and it's really, really hard to answer because if you're doing a big salmon and you're hammering scales for days and days and days, then you go a bit nuts. So I'll vary. So I've usually got about 5 pieces on the go at once, up to 5, maybe usually about 3, but they'll be at different stages. So one will need scales, one will need engraving, one will need the background done. So you can vary so that when you go into the workshop, you're not facing the same thing every day. And one will be kind of developing, you're always developing. So you always think about that. So you don't want to, sit and tap scales for days. If you're feeling on really good form when you go into the workshop, then you do the engraving of the flies and the other things which you've got one chance to do. And if you duff it up, you've duffed up the whole big sheet of metal, which is quite a price. So you've got to be on form to do that. So if you're on form, you do that. If you're feeling a bit rough and you've had a rough night the night before, then you hammer scales. So it's a kind of penance the next day too, to be hammering scales in a loud workshop all day. So yeah, you kind of vary. I did once count how many hammer blows there was in a herring which was about 5 inches long, and there was 987 hammer blows in it from start to finish. So when you're doing a big show, there's loads and loads. But I don't time them because I'll change jobs mid throughout the morning. If things aren't going well, then I'll chop and change. Or sometimes you get really frustrated with a piece, so you move on to another piece or change and come back to it. The mistakes that you made are always worth going back to, and you usually learn from. So it's a learning process. So I can't really say how long a piece takes. I did have one big pike piece that's because when I compose them, I lay them on the workshop floor and would be moving them around. And I had a pike piece that lay on the workshop floor for a year and a half before. So every time you go past it, I would move it or change it and it's the same with the shoals. I'll compose them on the floor so that I'll move them. And every time you go past them, you'll have a look at it again and readjust. So they finally arrive to how they should be.
And can you talked about if you learn from a mistake, if something goes wrong, is it easy to rectify? Is it possible to rectify, or once it's done, it's done? Or how does that work?
The metal's very unforgiving. So if you make a mistake, it can be kind of critical. but you'll always get the scrap value back from the metal. Sometimes you can hammer out mistakes or just bash it until it looks okay. But usually a mistake. The annoying thing is if you cut too much off a fish or too much off, that's the thing that can't be rectified. Then they get nailed to my workshop door. So my workshop door is covered in fish and different things and failed fish. And they're an almost reminder of fish that haven't gone so well or haven't been drawn properly or aren't right. But they actually make quite a nice door as well. So it's not too bad, I think.
And are you tough on yourself?
I'm not as tough on myself as my wife, Fiona, is. She'll tell me when something's rubbish. So she's quality control. I'll show her something that maybe I'm quite pleased with, and she'll go, "No, that's not good," and that's it. That means that is the defining issue.
Yeah. And the mental state of it as well, then, because you said if you've had a tough night or whatever, you choose. Are there times where you go into the workshop? And I suppose because it's your job, it's very hard to do. But do you walk into the workshop and say, not today, it doesn't feel right? Or is that a process of having all of those different pieces of work on the go that you can, if you're not feeling right in, like you say, doing the fly or whatever it is, you can do something that takes you back into that zone? Is that part of that process for you?
Yeah, I feel very lucky in a way because when I go into the workshop's the place I'm really, really happy to be. And I'm always delighted to be in. It's never a hardship to me to go into the workshop. So I'm always pleased to get there. And depending on how I'm feeling, if you're feeling really not on form, like when I had COVID and that, I would just tidy the workshop. And that seems to be good for you mentally as well because it tidies the workshop so you see everything and it puts everything in its right place and it kind of clears your mind. And then it's really nice the next day when you go in to do some proper work that you've got this clean, tidy workshop all set. So I love being in the workshop actually. So and that's not just because it's got an Oculus set in there as well.
And so do you find, I guess you put, as an artist, you put so much of your heart and soul into every piece. Do you find it, because I was thinking about the hammering that you said as well. So do you find that physically as well as mentally draining at times, that it's, you're doing 6, 8, 10 hours in the workshop? Do you find that, and then you can shut the door at the end of the day and then start at the next day? Does it take its toll? And I'm thinking about your hands as well as everything else, part of that creative work that you're actually doing.
Yes, it does take its toll on you. Physically, metal's really hard on you. So physically, yes, when you're hammering all the time, I know that I'm kind of a bit twisted because my right arm is used to hammering all the time. And I know that with my casting, because I hammer all the time, my casting is far too aggressive with my right hand. So I've got it's not got the subtlety or the finesse of the left hand at all, because it's just kind of power. So you physically, you are changing. With metals too, there's a lot of kind of gases and things which when you're young, you ignore breathing masks and you ignore the safety of things. But when you've worked in it for like 30, 40 years, it suddenly catches up with you. And suddenly your breathing isn't quite right. And there's different things and there's too much metal in you, etc. You do have a finite time to work in metal too. I know that I've discussed this with the likes of Jason Sweeney and other metal workers. And we know that we don't have the whole of life to work in metal. That metal does take its toll. So maybe I'll start painting later on. I'll go from. I would actually love to work in wood because woodworkers' workshops are always delightful. They're always lovely smell and they're nice warm material. They're always warm and they're always. Whereas a metal workplace is cold and it's got that kind of coldish metal smell about it. But then wood, I can't work in wood. I would love to work in wood, but wood's got too much life of its own. Like it cracks and splits and it does things that the metal doesn't. Metal, if you hit it hard enough or you apply the right heat and pressure, it'll do what you want and it'll stay there. So I've got great admiration for the people who do the amazing carvings and the fish carvings and that, because to work in wood must be a bit of a nightmare. But I am jealous of the workshop.
How about bamboo rods then? Is that something I can throw in for you?
That's got far too much finesse for me. Yeah, no, I'm not that subtle at all. I would no, maybe fiberglass, but bamboo would be too tricky. I'd get too frustrated. It's frustrating enough trying to tie flies, let alone do a bamboo rod.
So tell me, we're going to sort of intertwine these now. Did you grow up A, with a rod in your hand, and B, were you always artistic as you were growing up? Did you know the route that your life would take and how fish would become your muse, really?
I grew up in Lewis in a little place called Downtown Call, and there's a little river which did have salmon in it, but there was a little river beside called the Call, and our house was the last house before the moorland. And before I went to school, my mum just used to put me out each day, and I'd go into the ditch that was just nearby, and I'd muck about in the ditch all day. And gradually, I went down the ditch to the river, and just loved the river and everything about the river. So my dad, he wasn't fishing really. He fished for mackerel and stuff, kind of with crofting and that. They fished to eat. They didn't have a real love of kind of the actual fishing. I did. So maybe it came from the Orkney side of my family. So when I was young, when I was really small, I bought a white fiberglass rod, got got line on it, which I think was £10, because that was in case I caught a salmon with it, and stuck a worming hook on it, and went down and fished for days and caught nothing but eels and then started catching tiny trout. And I love the tiny trout are probably one of my favorite fish because they're so beautiful. They're such little gems. So yeah, it kind of grew from there. And then I always fished whenever there was any time. I would be on the river. So, and I liked sticking my head kind of just leaning over the banks and watching, and also sticking my head with a diving mask on to see what's underneath. So the river fascinated me right from that early stage up. So it seemed natural for me to start drawing fish because I would love drawings too. And I drew all the time. So the fish kind of came into that. And didn't get much pocket money. So I suddenly found that if I drew sometimes motorbikes, sometimes fish, then I could swap it for quenchy cups, which were popular at the time, which was a kind of lemonade drink at the tuck shop in school. So I could swap a drawing for one of these. So yeah, so I was commercial right from the beginning. So the love of the art and the fish just came together. When I went to college though, when I went to art college in Camberwell in London, I was doing abstract steel sculptures, probably loosely based on wrecks. And when I left college, I was still doing them, but then we moved to Orkney, where we lived for 20 years, and I was back to fishing. And as I said before, I made the fish for the house. Friends saw it and liked it and wanted one. So then I started doing that side, and then the color and the patination and the frames. The frames are more the abstract side. Like I still love abstract art, but the frames are where my abstract side come in. So the compositions and the colors of the metal come in more and more. So they kind of grew together. And the whole time I was teaching art when I left college at Kirkwood Grammar School. And the whole time I was working, we had family by then, but I was building a workshop and getting tools and more techniques together and developing it and beginning to sell more and more. And as soon as the accountant said that yes, I had a kind of livelihood with the art, I left teaching and went fully into, and it was really the fishing side that made it possible. Because I think when you're a fine artist, it's a very hard life because the fine art can be very fashionable. A gallery can pick you up and drop you the next day. But I find that the fishing fraternity, that if they like your work, they come to you and they'll come back to you for another piece, and they're very loyal. So it's been a lovely way to make my living.
How was that moment then when you heard from the accountant that you could go full time? Was that sort of and I guess you spoke to your wife about that and wanted to pursue that. And then how were those? I guess you were selling work before that, but those sales as a result when you became full time, how did that feel? That must have felt really pretty special, wouldn't it?
It was great. It was scary, but it was great because in school, both my kids had arrived in my classes. So I had to get out of school. I couldn't have my own kids in my classes. So, so it was a big relief, but it was very scary too. It was scary to actually just rely on your work. But I suppose being a teacher, you can always do supply or you could always go back. So there was a bit of a safety net. And because it had been so slow in building up over the years, I knew, the market, and I knew, where to sell pieces. I'd got involved with red spot artists who exhibited every year at the game fair, and that was a huge bonus to me. I learned an awful lot from them about markets and about selling and about the clientele, and also the game fairs at the time. The big CLA game fairs were fantastic. The fishing, there were so many fishing people there, and all the big companies, all the rods, everything. So it was a perfect. So we'd almost aim for the game fair every year. So it's kind of a shame that it's dropped off in popularity over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it was scary to begin with.
Yeah, that must have been well, and huge respect and kudos to you for making such a huge success out of it as well. It's really fantastic to see. And I was in a restaurant in Exmouth a little while back, and I saw a piece of yours hanging on the wall there at Limpstone Manor. And yeah, it was really cool to see that and really exciting to see that as well. And it must be thrilling to do that and to be able to turn a passion into a full-time job as well. So massive respect for that. I often mention about fly fishing on here as some form of art, and I guess you're well placed and can easily say yes or no. How do you see fly fishing as an art form? And I'm thinking about the end product, the quarry, but also the casting, everything else. How do you see it as somebody with an artistic eye?
It's a fantastic world to be involved in, because it's kind of got everything. It's got that you're part of nature. You can get quite as close to nature as possible. Your quarry is an incredibly beautiful and evasive creature that you can spend hours just, and always surprises you. I think the people say to me, "Oh, will you not get bored with doing fish?" But no, not at all. Every time you're fishing, or even just casting practice, you see different things happening, and I love that, and it's very much part of my art, and very much part of art. I think is just the observation. I love it. The favorite moment for me is when you see something that you question, that only you've seen, and you question yourself as to whether you actually saw that. So it's just a flash or just something, and I love that feeling. But the whole picture is a huge art form that you'll never, because there's no answer. You never get to the end. It's not like playing a game of golf where you get to the end and you've done so many strokes of that. Not at all. And you can have just as good a day when you catch none as a day when you catch a lot. But you'll have seen something different, like I love seeing otters and things like that. But you'll have seen something odd that's really inspired you. And I don't immediately go home and put it, into a piece of work. It kind of sits at the back of your head for a long time, and then it'll come out in pieces, a piece of work, and you'll learn a new technique that suits that, and suddenly the two will come together, and you'll think, yeah, that's how I'll do this piece. So, but I suppose I'm meandering from you asking the art form. The art form is incredible. the casting. Just now I'm doing casting lessons with Will Shaw, who's extremely patient with me because I want my salmon casting is atrocious. And to see him cast, it's just a thing of beauty. It is a thing of beauty. The way the line, and there's no effort, and the line unfurls, and it's an amazing beauty. So, and you're drawing a line, all with the rod, you're drawing a line. And I think, so it is a real thing of beauty. I did say that because I was to get so many knots last year, I'm going to start cutting out my knots and I'm going to set them in resin as to great knots I've done. Because the actual knot itself is an incredibly complex thing that you can never repeat. So I thought, oh yeah, I could have like fantastic fangles that I've got into, like up on the wall. But yeah, to see people cast, and also like really good fishing people, they see and understand everything, the whole picture, and it's grasping that whole picture. So it is an art. It is seeing the whole picture, not just focusing on a tiny bit of it or anything like that. They're seeing from the entomology to the weather to the time, everything kind of comes together. So yeah, I would say fishing is a fantastic art form.
I think that's a great answer, and yeah, shout out to Will because he's a friend of the show as well, and yeah, it's been fantastic as well to speak to, and I love where he comes from. I'm sure the lessons you're having with him are absolutely fantastic. The other thing that I was thinking about was where you said about being in nature and immersed in it, and I have done a lot of still water fishing, and I don't decry it, I just don't do it. But it suddenly dawned on me when you said that I wonder if part of that standing in the river makes that connection just that little bit closer, and you feel really as one or part of it, and that is part of that. Does that strike you in any way? It just came into my head when you were saying that. That was all.
Yeah, definitely. When you're standing in the river, one, I don't think animals, bird life, and that aren't as afraid of you because I don't think you're the full height or something. There's something about you when you're standing in the river, they're not. So they will come much closer to you. You're also, because your legs can be freezing in the cold, you're experiencing the temperature of the water too. And so you're actually part of the water and you're creating your own kind of bow waves and your own feature. So yeah, you have actually become part of the picture, I think. Yeah. I've got a friend, Nick Hart, who's an amazing fisherman, and he looks like a heron when he's fishing because he's just so focused and he is just everything is still until it needs to be done. And then yeah, so yeah, fantastic fishing guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I've spent many hours on the water with him, and you're exactly right. You see things go quiet, and you can see that focus, be it the hunter. I don't know if it's part of the hunter instinct comes out when we crouch over or whatever it may be, but when you get into, and we talk many times on the podcast about the zone where you enter it and you're not oblivious because you feel part of what's going on, you're absorbed into it, that then it's just about that fish and you making that cast to that fish. But tell me, when did the fly rod become an important part of your armory, and how did it become an important part of your armory?
That in Lewis, when I grew up, it was just the fiberglass rod and the river and worms and auto boards. Sometimes I hate to say, but the things like that. So I was just fishing. When I moved up to Orkney, when I'd done my teacher training, and went back to fishing and fishing in the sea, and that it was good friends, Colin Kirkpatrick Pucker, who took me fishing in a little loch just nearby with the fly, and it just everything kind of made sense. That to fish with the fly seemed to be a really lovely thing to do. I was very lucky. I caught two the first time, and they were on a Wickham's Fancy Muddler, and it all just made sense. Yeah. And then there was the fly tying and everything about it kind of came together, that you weren't just putting. Then in Orkney, they're very they fish, some of them with the worm on a fly rod where they roll the worm, and it's a really deadly way to fish. So when I first went up to Orkney, that's what I was doing. So it was fly rod, but you were rolling a worm. and it's deadly to do. So it was a natural progression then for me to put a kind of muddler things on and start fishing that way. So yeah. So and then of course you get into that you need different rods and you need all the gear and you so and you like it's all fantastic stuff. It's all, and because of my business, it's all tax deductible because it's all research for me. So that works really well.
Absolutely. So I assume you've got a fabulous armory of fly rods, have you?
Um, no, not enough yet. But it's okay. I used to at the game fair quite often. You would do kind of swaps or things like that for fly rods with people, and so I swap for a piece of work and things like that. So yeah, it's what I've got's okay.
Yeah. And you talked about the double hander. Is salmon something, you grew up living by a river that had a modest run of salmon by the sound of it? Is that something that's always been on the radar, or is that something that's a growing interest for you?
It was funny when I grew up in '70s, they were poaching the salmon really heavily, so and they were poaching them with nets along the beach. So there was no salmon, but when I left Lewis, there was really no salmon left in the call. So I was amazed 3 or 4 years ago when a friend got in touch and said, "Oh, there is salmon back in the call." So I was amazed that they'd come back. Salmon were always the really special fish, so they were kind of the king of fish. We ate loads of salmon when I was growing up because everyone caught them. So you ate an awful lot. I do feel very guilty because I stole one once from an otter because I was out on the Sunday walk when I was wee and I came across an otter that had just dragged one out of the river and I took it home. It left it because I kind of scared. And I always feel guilty about that. I always feel guilty that. But then I thought the otters are such good fishermen that they can spare one now and again. So, but yeah, salmon are special. But I didn't, when I fished, it was just really for trout in Lewis that I fished for. To have caught a salmon would have been an amazing thing. I left Lewis when I was 16. So, and then moved to Edinburgh. So I didn't fish then till I moved up to Orkney. So there was that kind of, so coming from Orkney where it's trout only, salmon make no sense at all. So coming to the mainland to Perthshire, fishing for salmon, suddenly there was a very unusual creature that you were fishing for, where it didn't need to eat, it shouldn't eat, it shouldn't really take the fly. The fly sometimes looked like nothing on earth, and yet so it didn't have the logic of a trout. Trout, right depth, right temperature, right fly, and a trout will attack it. So the salmon was kind of fickle. So I quite like that when you catch a salmon, it's almost gifted itself to you. It's almost decided to go for your fly. So I do like that it's a kind of special fish. I want to get a lot better with salmon because, well, I'm going to the East Ranga in August. So I want my casting to be much, much better so that I don't miss any that I should be catching. So that's why I got in touch with Will and why he's kindly helping me.
Fantastic. And how would you describe the moment, those many, many casts that you're making, and then that line suddenly comes to life? That's pretty special, isn't it?
It's hugely. What I loved when I've been to the East Ranga and West Ranga before, and it's when you think you've hooked the bottom and the bottom moves. That's kind of special that you suddenly, because it's frustration. 1 second, I think fishing's like that. 1 second you can't go any lower, and then the next minute you're elated, or vice versa when you lose the fish. But yeah, that when the bottom moves and you suddenly know there's a good fish on, that's when it's really special. And the electric just travels up the line to you. The excitement of that is intense. There's no other feeling like it actually.
No, I think it's fabulous. And I've talked many times before about the connection between you and the fish and how you've just described about, when the fish decides to take your fly. There is that connection, isn't there? And that moment, if you're lucky enough to land it, I hold that fish for a few seconds before it goes. And I feel it's quite I find it emotional, I have to say, that fish and I have that very brief connection and has gone. They're pretty cool, aren't they?
Very much so. That, yeah, just to, it's a kind of honor to hold a creature like that, even, as you say, for a fleeting second or so. And when you, like, that's when you get a real inspiration for the artwork too, because fish, I think it's quite good that I work in metal because fish are like metal. They're quite hard because they're so muscular and they're very metallic, but they've got that beautiful depth and iridescence in them, which just it draws you in every time. And you can never produce a piece of art that'll match like a Loch brownie from way up in the moorland. Like the beauty of that is stunning. So that's kind of my artistic aim, is always to try and get something that has that amount of presence or beauty. I think that's what I'm going for.
And is that why fish have become your muse? Is that the reason? Was it, did you explore other avenues of artwork before settling with fish, or was it always destined to be that way?
I think it was probably always destined to be that way. I think, yeah, I know that, I'm not nearly as interested in birds or in other animals. I love insects, but the fish I do find absolutely fascinating and of great kind of beauty. So I think, yes, once I got the technique, so I went to a very traditional college where I learned, where because I knew that the conceptual artistic side could come afterwards. I wanted to learn as many techniques and processes as I could so that I could work in in more conceptual side when I left. So the metal techniques seemed to marry together with fish just really naturally. So yeah, I love that. And with the patination techniques, we had a very good tutor in college who Richard Hughes, who'd written a book about metal patination techniques, and he opened my eyes as to the colors that you can actually get naturally from metal. And once I knew that I had a palette of colors that suited the fish and their environment too, that was a big breakthrough. Recently, I went back to Lewis, back to the Col River. I'm walking up the river. I took a little piece of mine and I set it down beside the pools and in the pools and took photographs underwater. And I've realized that that's where all my colors have come from. My whole palette has come from probably the Col River in Lewis. Because on moorland, which everyone thinks is most people think it's fairly mundane in color, that it's kind of browns and mauves or whatever. There's flashes of incredible reds, incredible oxided colors, rust colors, things like that. So I've realized that that's where my palettes come from. With the compositions of the pieces, they've also come from the large areas of sky and the flat lines and things, that kind of bleakish or kind of more barren-like area. My colors are definitely more northern. Like I get no excitement about going to the south of France for the colors or anything like that. I get excited when I go north to Norway or Iceland and that, because the colors and the horizons and everything, so they make sense to me. So I've realized I've got a very northern way of looking at things.
Wonderful. And when you discovered these palettes that you could play with, how long was that sort of process for you to develop a style that you recognized as your work? Was that a matter of months, weeks, years? How long does that take?
It takes years, and because you don't realize where you're getting to, you think that, and you're always improving. So it's quite easy to do because you're always progressing. And when I said, about making mistakes, well, when you make a mistake coloring, you get a different color, and suddenly you've added that to your palette too, that you can get this. I always say to people that I could get green, no problem, because green, you add copper nitrates, copper sulfates to copper, and it will go green. But I wanted a blue. And I noticed that in pub urinals, the joint in the urinals goes from blue to green. And I was thinking, oh, that's got to be the ammonia, or there's got to be some. So after various experiments, I found that the blue comes from the flux that's in the solder. That it makes it blue and then green. So once I did that, I had the blue. So yeah, I'm always on the an eye out to see other colors and to bring them in, and they can always help you with the gold leafing. Like in one of the brown trout, I probably use I at the beginning I only thought there would be one color of gold leaf, but of course you get loads. So in a trout, I probably use about 4 different gold leaves, going from moon gold to rose noble to rose gold to things like that. Yeah, so it was they kind of gradually, and I would say people say I've got quite a few friends who are retiring now and that, and I haven't got that option. I don't think, because I think it's very much that I have to do it, and I think even if the accountant hadn't said you can stop work and you can change now, I don't think I'd have stopped. I think it's something that I have to do. So I do like either being in the workshop or being on the river. And I've got John Girach, his quote, "How can a man be considered successful if he hasn't got time to fish?" That's above my door in my workshop to remind me that I need to get out every now and again. And of course, having a little dog helps me get out and walk too. So yeah, the problem is not going to the workshop; it's actually getting out of the workshop that's my problem.
Fantastic. We've talked about some of the sort of freshwater species, but you've mentioned pike, salmon, brown trout, of course. I'm guessing grayling come in there as well. Well, I know grayling come into that as well. But you also tackle saltwater. Well, I know you talked about mackerel, but I mean warm water saltwater species like bonefish. They're pretty. That must be an interesting, having caught them, and the coloration of them when you hold them just in the water there is absolutely astonishing. Are they fun to work with as well from that point of view?
Yeah, I love traveling to fish, and it was going to Los Rocos in Venezuela the first time with Nick Hart, and just catching a bonefish, and it surpassed everything that people had said about it, and people had said an awful lot, but the sheer power of a bonefish. It's funny with the light and the palette and everything had to change for these fish because you're not in the same water, you're not, and suddenly everything changes and the sun's more intense. So the whole pieces they changed quite radically. The bonefish and the tarpon and that. There's the scales in them are beautiful. So I had to make a whole lot of new Rapusi chisels. So a whole lot of different metal chisels for the different shapes of the kind of tarpon scales, bonefish scales. So that was exciting. So it's like I said, I'll never get bored of doing fish because there's always different fish and you always see more fish. And the experience of being on a kind of mushroom flats where you just see sea around you and yet you're up to your thighs is so exciting and so infuriating when the guide says 3 bonefish coming 11 o'clock and you can't see anything at all, and then suddenly you see them. I love seeing sharks. That was a huge kind of delight, was seeing sharks and seeing the different wildlife and the different things around. So I get very excited traveling to fish. And to make the fish, then when you get home, it's really nice. It's really nice that you have and I've done pieces where it's always the little bonefish that's going for the fly. The bigger ones are always in the background, but they're beaten by the little one who nicks in and nicks the fly first. So there's a lot of, although it's very frustrating sometimes, it teaches you an awful lot. The guides out there don't like it when I don't want to take my rod with me for the day. I just want to kind of experience, and you take your camera and you just want to watch the others fish and see what's around. Because when you're fishing, you're so intense on one thing. Sometimes you miss something that's happening around you, or you can take in kind of more if you're just walking and watching people fish. So yeah, it kind of opens up you to a whole new ideas and whole new palettes and things.
Yeah. I think that sort of around the nose and the eye of the fish is it almost, and this does it a huge disservice, but it sort of kind of reminded me of the Airfix paint that you used to get with models that was on some water and thinly. It was just I can't describe it appropriately right now, but the beauty of how they looked are absolutely extraordinary. And we've talked about the take of salmon, and the take of bonefish is pretty cool as well, isn't it? When they grab hold of that, and that first run is special, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just when you suddenly realize that you're actually hooked into it, and this thing is exploding with power. And they're not huge for what power they have. But then I quite like the contrast above the water. It's idyllic. There's like different little islands, sun shining, turquoise sea, and then I used to live in North Peckham Estate in the 70s, and underneath the water, I always thought it's like North Peckham Estate because there are so many predatory kind of things under, which are all after the bonefish. So you realise why they've got that takeoff and why they're so nervous and jittery. And there's permit too that they're kind of watching the whole time. So I do like that the fish kind of suit their environment with that. But yeah, they're just amazing looking creatures.
Yeah, and Venezuela is one of those, I think probably one of the very, very few, if only place, where you'll actually see bonefish rise. And what I mean by that, I may have talked about it on here previously, but the pelicans, you'll have massive bait balls, and pelicans dive into these bait balls. And while they're filtering out the water, the fish are by the side of their bill and they drop out, and the bonefish come right up to try and take that bait. And the idea is, if you're brave enough, is to throw a floating gummy minnow pattern that floats by the pelican that the bonefish takes, which it's extraordinary to see 10-pound bonefish coming up at pelicans trying to take a bait fish out of their bills, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and so exciting, and everything's excited. The bonefish are excited, the pelicans are, and the fishing people are kind of really. So everything is just pure adrenaline, huge adrenaline rush then, and then suddenly calm, and it's all over. No, great experiences, and I really loved the barracuda too. I thought the barracuda are amazing. The way they charge. Just a short one charge, and how they're waiting to kind of intercept and to attack the bonefish, and I found them quite amazing to see.
Yeah, and one of the stars for me, I may have talked about, was false albacore out there as well, and I'm sure you can catch them in lots of places, but the thrill of seeing them busting bait and shooting off somewhere else and then busting bait and having to make long, great casts and rip the fly and savage takes and everything else were absolutely phenomenal. It is a amazing place. Perhaps one day. Tell me, what sort of angler are you? Do you like to fish on your own? Do you like the company of somebody? Do you like a mixture? What do you like to do?
I really like, favorite kind of fishing is really a big moorland jump. So quite a big walk into the moor, where to arrive at a small loch. Usually maybe with one or two friends, and then you'll split up and you'll fish yourselves. And then you'll come back together for a cup of coffee and to assess what's happening, and then a big walk back where you're talking again. So the actual fishing, I quite like being solitary, but the actual fishing trip, I quite like it to be very sociable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds a perfect mix, actually, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I usually go up to Ascent in May, although they didn't go this year. But yeah, and that's a great favourite because there's so many great little hill lochs that take a fair bit of walk. I quite like the walk, so it's almost a reward when you come over that ridge and you see the loch, and then immediately you're assessing kind of what's happening there and where you'll go. And yeah, I like that. I think that's really. And then up there also there's Arctic char on the go, which is another great prey.
Yeah. We've had Stuart on here from Ascent, and again, that's another place that's so on the radar that sounds like it's got everything for a fly angler. There's a real mix of stuff, isn't there? There's the small streams, the lochs, there's the sea fishing, there's everything, isn't there?
Yeah, it's just, and the setting. is unbelievable. It's just an incredible setting. So yeah, it does have a lot. And uh, early in the season, May and that, the midges aren't out yet because the midges are fierce up there. Yeah, so it's always one to be have in the back of your mind as midges. The best bit of advice I ever had, best bit of advice I ever had about midges was from an old man in Glenetiv who had said the midges were just fierce the day we were there. They were coming in clouds, actual clouds around you, and just driving you demented. And he said, "Oh yes, they're bad today." He says the best way to deal with them, I find, is to kill them one at a time.
Yeah, that cuts into your fishing day a bit, I would think, on that basis. But very good. Tell me, do you have a sort of a dream destination? Do you have a place that you think, yeah, I'd really like to fish there, I'd like to visit there, that's the place that one day I'm going to get to? Or it may be somewhere you've been that you felt as the dream destination.
I love going to Iceland. I find the landscape just incredible, and I love the layers of the black soil, and then there's the incredible color of the water, and then there's great fish, and just everything about it. There's wildflowers, and also the bird life there isn't bothered by you. It'll come kind of right up to you. So I love Iceland as a destination, and you'll suddenly have a break in the clouds, and there'll be a volcano kind of in the background. So I do love it as a destination. I did go there up the north of Iceland for the big trout, and I blanked. And I'm desperate to go back there because all the friends who I went with, they all caught, and I didn't. I had a disastrous trip. It was good, but it was disastrous, and so I wanted to go back there and catch big trout. But also after seeing, I would love to go for GTs. That would be great. It would be great to feel a GT on the line at least once. Would be great. Yeah, no. On the rooster fish. I know there's quite a lot on the list.
If I don't speak, I reckon your list is going to get ever longer. But I'm sort of kind of with you on that with GTs and roosters and stuff like that. I think I think I've had the conversation with Matt Harris. I think and we said I think they're the most photogenic fish there are. And have you ever tackled those actually?
No. Oh, doing them, making them, yes. But I have never caught one. But yes, I've made them, yeah. And so that was a wee bit infuriating because you've not caught one. But hopefully I did it justice. I would hope it was too kind of, and I was trying very much to get the bully boy kind of, head on bulk charge kind of, so to get the kind of aggression in them and their eyes. So yeah, I watched I watched a lot of the programs and that just constantly, and you're pausing it to see how the fish is looking. But it is a bit infuriating that you haven't actually felt one on the line because they do look immense. So. And them taking the frigate gulls out of the air, that's just one of the most stunning wildlife films, I think.
They're extraordinary, aren't they? The GTs, yeah, from that. And I remember that YouTube video where they were catching them on flip-flop poppers, weren't they? Somebody used a flip-flop and called a GT on one of those, and they frightened the life out of me. They sound extraordinary. I don't know if I'm strong enough to take one of those on. I've seen them to have a throw at, but very fleeting one, and that's been about as near as I get. I feel relatively comfortable with bluefin trevally, but the giants, I don't know yet. I may one day I might have a go at those. But you talked about your workshop, and you talked about having a TV on, and you talked about having the radio on and everything else. And I just wondered, I've been asking guests recently about the road trip soundtrack and a piece of music that would set the theme or the mood for a road trip. Give me a couple that you think you'd put on in the car radio or on Spotify or something. Give me a couple of tracks that you listen to that you think would set the tone for your fishing road trip.
Well, one of the last trips that was on up north, it was Pete and Diesel, Loch Marie, which which is a band from Lewis, and it's one you can sing along, sing as loud as you can, kind of in like. So the three of us, there was three of us in a van, and we were singing as loud as possible. So that does set the thing for going. Yeah. Also, my music tastes are kind of the borderline and being quite heavy. So I do like the Dead Kennedys Holiday in Cambodia and quite heavy stuff like that too. So I will play that or reggae, uh, yeah, Louis Louis or things like that. So quite a mix of stuff that I would play. But I don't really listen once you're on the hill. Like I don't listen to music. But yeah, on the way it's all that kind of, yeah. So some reggae and some old fashioned punk and some modern Pete and Diesel. That sort.
That sounds a perfect mix to me. Good choices, good choices. One more day, where would it be? Would it be on that river where you grew up, or where would it be if you had one more day's fishing?
Yeah, it would be on that river. It would be, I'd walk up the river, which when I was small seemed to go on for miles and miles into the moorland, but isn't, when I did it just fairly recently, it's not that far really, but there's a water, yeah, up the river and there's a loch out there and it's got just small trout on it. And that's where I would, yeah, like to maybe peg out. I did a nice commission for a man who was in his 80s and he wanted me to do his lifetime of fishing. And he gave me a great handwritten timeline of his lifetime fishing. And he'd gone from small trout in small chalk streams, and he'd gone on to do marlin, big tuna, GT, tarpon, huge. He'd had an amazing big salmon in Russia. He'd had an amazing lifetime, and he's done the full circle. And now he's back to small trout in the chalk streams, little trout. And he says, yeah, as a younger man, you have the energy and the strength to go after the big quarry, but then you come back to what you. So when you're saying about going for the GTs, yeah, our time's running out. Well, my time's running out because I'm getting older, and I know I won't be, because I'll be back to the little brown trout and kind of little burn soon.
Yeah, I don't think I could ever leave those little brown trout. They're too difficult to pull myself away from. So I love them deeply, and I don't think that's ever going to change for me. Sam, we've spoken for well over an hour now. I've really enjoyed learning about you. I've really enjoyed learning about what goes into your magnificent artwork. If people want to, and I recommend strongly that they do, because like you say, it's contemporary, it's different, it's really interesting. If people want to find you, how do they do so?
If they look up Sam MacDonald on the internet, my website will come up. And I'm also Instagram and Facebook. But people are very welcome to pop in for a coffee here at the workshop and studio. It's always easier for me to explain with the actual tools in front of them, and they'll see works in progress. And because I'm self-employed and work by myself, I'm always delighted to see people, especially fishing people, because you get great fishing stories that you can chat away. And it all sinks in. It's all part of what I do, is hearing other people's tales and stories and hearing what people have done, and it fires the imagination. So I really like it when people will call in. So just to drop me a line, an email or a text, and say, that they're coming past Our Lady and they're going to drop in. That'd be fine. Galleries that have my work, the House of Brewer probably has the most of my work. So if you're on the A9 on the way north, the House of Brewer in the gallery there, it's got a fair number of pieces. So there's the social media or the gallery.
Fantastic. Sam, I thoroughly enjoyed catching up with you and hearing your story. Thank you so much for talking with me on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thanks very much for having me, Pete. Thanks for letting me be part of it. Yeah.
You are most welcome. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this edition and learning about Sam's life story and what goes into his artwork. You've got the details to go and have a look. I'm hoping that he accepts coach parties as well when we all go up to his studio for a cup of tea. Is that right, Sam?
Small coaches.
Perhaps we'll come up on a minibus and drop in and see you. But I would encourage you. I'd encourage you to have a look at his artwork. It really is fabulous. And so I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Fly Culture Podcast. I think Sam's got one more thing he wants to tell us, actually.
Yeah. Also, sorry, I meant to say I'll be at the Welsh Game Fair later on this year. I think it's September. So I'll be there with the Red Spot artists. So if you're about, come and drop into the marquee and have a look at the work.
There we go. So if you're heading to the show, I hope you'll drop in and see Sam along there. But everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. Hopefully the magazine, the summer edition of our magazine, will be arriving with you soon. Thank you again for everyone who has ordered it, subscribed to it. I can't tell you what it means to us, and we're incredibly proud of it. As you know, we're completely independent. We don't have advertising in there. We really try hard to find articles that we think will resonate with you as fly anglers, and hope you enjoy them. I know I look forward to putting it together and reading the articles, and I hope when this starts arriving with you, you'll feel the same. But thanks so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.